I want to talk today about the vital need for America to change its food culture. We are in a desperate need to change our food culture to offset the incredible healthcare crisis that we are facing. What's the healthcare crisis, Matt? What's going on? I feel fine. Obesity and diabetes. They actually call it a new word now in the medical community. They call it diabesity, because the two words actually are merged together to show the trend in our culture. Lots of things are happening, and we have the data now to show that what we're doing with food and how we're being fed as a culture is making a serious impact. And I'm going to make a case that we need to increase our protein dramatically and not cut out our carbohydrates, but at least reduce them more to the way that we ate thousands of years ago. We need to change our food culture because what's happening isn't working. How do we know? Well, we have data. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has put out tables for diabesity trends. The latest diabesity table trend for 2012 from the Center for Disease Control has shown that diabetes has risen since 1980 from 493,000 cases to 1.7 million. That is triple the amount of diabetes. That is a huge number. Along with that number, there are numbers increasing for type 2 diabetes in adolescents and pre-teenagers. That's crazy. Our culture and our food is making a serious impact on our youth and our future, as well as the working population right now. What else is going on? From the web, again, Center for Disease Control and Prevention puts out tables for obesity trends. We have the obesity trends from 1960 all the way to 2008. Men and women have both shown a dramatic increase. Let's just do the bullets. 1960 to 1980, we're pretty much on an even trend. Everything's going fine. Women's obesity rate in our population is 15.7 to 17.1, in that range, 1960 to 1980. Okay, 2008, 35.5% obesity. Men fare no better. 1960 to 1980, 10.7 to 12.8% of the population is obese for men. Now, 2008, 32%. Let's face it. Driving to work, looking at the school bus stops, the kids today don't look like they did 40 years ago. Something is going on. We need to look at what we can do to change our food culture. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has the data and the statistics. Unfortunately, we've been manipulated with our food and our medical data, not maliciously, but with poor data and poor understanding of what food does for us. I need to read an editorial by the American Medical Association so I can put the background into place for how we got here. It's an editorial from the AMA opposing the new nutritional guidelines that were to be published in 1980. Listen closely. We believe that it would be inappropriate at this time to adopt proposed national dietary guidelines as set forth in the report on dietary goals for the United States. The evidence for assuming that benefits to be derived from that adoption of such universal dietary goals as set forth in the report is not conclusive, and there is potential for harmful effects from a radical long-term dietary change as would occur through the adoption of the proposed guidelines. It goes on to say, the AMA believes that there are insufficient data to recommend such changes in the diet on a nationwide scale. Haidt and Feynman, registered dietitian, et al., in the face of contradictory evidence, this report of the Dietary Guidelines for American Committee, Nutrition, 2010, October. So this is a snippet of the American Medical Association's editorial to Congress in opposition to the guidelines that Congress wanted to put out in 1980. The guidelines came out in 1980. And that's when the obesity trends and diabetes trends changed dramatically. What is some of the literature or research that Congress got to be so galvanized to make nutritional protocol changes? It was based on false precedent. Basically, doctors were doing autopsies on middle-aged men and showing severe arteriosclerosis, heart disease. Okay. Somehow they made the adoption that it was the fat and the saturated fat from carving meat that did that. There is no research to show that pasture-fed, organic, grass-fed beef or pork actually does this. Let's look at some other data. Sally Fallon wrote a book called, Nourishing Traditions. It was published in the 1990s, and it has USDA stats regarding our dietary intakes. From 1910 to 1970, we did some amazing things with our food. Fat consumption, animal fat consumption dropped by 25%, 1910 to 1970. Butter consumption dropped by 77%. That's a saturated fat. It is congealed at room temperature. Trans fat increased by 400%. Most trans fats are now considered to be toxic, and great lengths are gone into reducing them. But 1910 to 1970, we had no such data. Sugar increased by 60%. And heart disease went from 1% to 50% of the population. That's a massive increase. But there's a few details that were left out of the research. The majority of the people that were getting the heart disease were men. Does anybody remember what was actually going on between 1910 and 1970? We were involved with more wars and conflicts around the globe, with our young men going all around, living in foxholes, eating MREs. I think the term is meal replacement equivalent or something like that. Eating MREs and smoking cigarettes that the government gave them, because if you keep a soldier happy, he's going to do what you ask him. So we have World War I, we have World War II, we have the Vietnam conflict, we have the Korean War. All of these things are happening, and these men are coming back with arteriosclerosis. One of the biggest factors for creating arteriosclerosis is inflammation, not animal fat, not pasture beef that has not been fed antibiotics and is on the carving table at dinner. It's not that. It's the fact that these young men were dumping cortisol for years of their life, smoking cigarettes and eating rot gut and anything else that they could actually do to do their military job. And then we interpreted that, or parts of the American Medical Association, because some of them promoted the guidelines, they promoted that we needed to change our food, and they went to Congress. Congress saw the data, and they immediately rushed to pass the food guide pyramid and guidelines for the American population, to which it said to dramatically reduce fat intake. When you reduce fat intake, by default, you will increase, if calories are kept the same, carbohydrate intake. Fat intake typically comes from protein. As protein is cut down, the carving meats are reduced, you're limiting butters and oils, you're actually making more room for carbohydrates. This made a huge factor. Let's look at some of the math. So the guidelines for protein intake as they stand right now are based on what we need. And I'm going to put needs in quotes based on what we consider positive nitrogen balance. The Institute for Medicine